Hi, Pastor Kip here. I hope you're enjoying this change of weather. It's warmer today, later in the week. When I was growing up, not far from my home, a couple of miles, lived my Aunt Ruth and her husband, Uncle Edward. Aunt Ruth was my father's sister, one of his sisters, and we would often go over to their home for family gatherings and get-togethers, and barbecue, and go fishing in their lake that they had there. Kids would play in their big basement downstairs. It was a great place for all the family together. And one time when I was over there, I was a teenager by this time, 15, 16, something like that, if I remember correctly. And I was going down the hallway back to the restroom, and I noticed on the wall, I'm sure it'd been there for a long time, just as a kid. I didn't pay attention, but it caught my attention this time. It was a frame with kind of a felt background in it, what would have been a picture frame. But instead of a picture, there were several medals, military medals, and I got to looking at them. And then I noticed that right there in the middle of the collection of medals was a Purple Heart. To my knowledge, I had never known anything about any of this. My Uncle Edward was kind of a quiet guy. He did his work. He was a foreman at a plant, and he worked at night. And so their whole life was around his work. My Aunt Ruth was a guidance counselor at the school where I and so many of my family members had gone and graduated from. And so I went back down to my Aunt Ruth and I said, "Hey, what are those things on the wall? Those medals?" And she went back there with me and she told me, she said, "Well, they're your Uncle Edward's." That's kind of all she said. And I said, "Say more about that. What's that about?" And she said, "Well, he was in the Korean War, and these are his medals." And I said, "And the Purple Heart?" And she said, "Yes, he received a Purple Heart in combat." This is information I needed. All the stories, all the family, all the gatherings, all the times together. I never knew that. And it intrigued me. She said, "You can go talk to him about it if you want to. He's usually pretty tight lipped about it. He doesn't like to talk about it much." So I did. I went back and sat with him and I asked him about that. And he acknowledged it and said yes. And I said, "Well, tell me the story and tell me about it." And he didn't really want to. Sometime later, I had a research paper that I had to do in an American history class. And so I decided I wanted to do my paper on Uncle Edward if he would tell me about it. So I set up a time to go talk to him. And in about 10 minutes' time, he shared that he had been in battle in Korea, in a battle, one of the turning points in the Korean War called the Battle of Heartbreak Ridge. And he didn't give a lot of detail about it, just they were engaging with enemy troops, and there were a lot of people that died. Over 3,000 American soldiers died in that battle, and that he was serving in forces with the United Nations along with French soldiers and soldiers from the Netherlands as they were battling the rise of communism. This, of course, was at the height of the Cold War, and he talked a little bit about that. Then I wanted him to talk about himself, and he wouldn't. All he said was, "Look," he said, "I did my best, just like all the rest did their best." I wanted more information about the Purple Heart. He wouldn't give it. I wanted more information about the medals he received. He wouldn't get it. He just simply said, "I did my best, and all the rest did their best, and we're glad that we got home safely." Here was an individual that I'd grown up with, gone to church with every Sunday, sat right there. Stories about him I didn't know. Here was a whole past about his experience that I didn't know and that he didn't really want to talk about it. And yet, his way of saying it was that he did his best. There's lots of things about a lot of people that we don't know. And oftentimes, there are heroes, if you will, in our midst, and we don't even know it because they don't talk about it. And there are other extremes, people on the other end, that's all they talk about. But he impressed me in his quiet way of doing his best, doing what he knew he had to do, and yet not really wanting to talk about it. I have no idea about what he experienced and the horrors of the war that he was a part of. Just his simple way of being the person that he was and carrying out his duties to the best of his ability. I raise that because this coming Sunday, as I continue this sermon series on the Dirty Dozen in search of the 12 apostles, we will consider one of the apostles that we know very little about. He's known as St. James the Less. Now, last Sunday, I focused on the apostle James, known as St. James the Great. And I shared with you that there are two apostles named James. I must confess to you that there's not a lot of information that we know about James the Less. Perhaps it is because he didn't want to talk about it. And I don't know why many of the other apostles didn't talk about him more, because outside the Bible, in some historical records, we know some things about James that are quite impressive about who he was, and more importantly, why Jesus maybe chose him to be one of his apostles. You contrast him with colorful characters like Simon Peter, who did a lot of talking and a lot of preaching, and a lot of evangelism flowed forth out of people like Simon Peter. But not so much from the quiet, kind of unassuming apostle known as James the Less. Why is he known as James the Less? We'll talk about that. Seems kind of like a negative way to cast him, but it's meant in a different sort of way, and we'll be talking about that. We'll also be talking about how James gave his best, even though it wasn't flashy and it didn't get a lot of attention. Perhaps it was that, like my Uncle Edward, he was far more of a package than the naked eye could behold. And he went about his calling in Christ in a way that didn't get a lot of fanfare, didn't get any awards that we know of. But yet there he is, a part of the 12, being the person that God wanted him to be and faithfully following Christ. So this coming Sunday at 11, we will talk about St. James the Less, one of the 12 apostles of Jesus. Be sure and mark your calendar for all the activities coming up with Holy Week, as we will begin with Palm Sunday and Maundy Thursday service at 6 o'clock, and then Good Friday at 6 p.m. Ways in which we will walk through the last week of Jesus on this earth prior to his crucifixion. And then, of course, we will get ready for the fun-filled festival of Easter, and Easter Sunday and the beginning of Eastertide. Bring a friend and a family member. And hey, take heart in knowing that you may carry out your life's duty in quiet, unassuming ways. But that doesn't mean you can't be faithful. That doesn't mean you can't give your best to Christ. And that doesn't mean that Christ doesn't see the best in you. All that and more this coming Sunday. I look forward to seeing you in church at 11 o'clock this Sunday. Bring a friend, a family member, and let's continue to grow together in Christ right here in this community of faith that I'm proud to serve. I'll see you then. God bless you.